everybody. Thanks, Carl. So awesome to be here in Seattle, and it's actually sunny. So I'm coming to you from San Francisco, and I'm coming to you to talk about one team, one dream. The longer title, of course, is Better Together, How Cross-Functional Collaboration Creates Better Products, which is, I think, what we're all looking to do. So I'm Vivian. Thanks to Carl, thanks to Lori, Rob, all the organizers. It's been a great conference so far. I'm so excited to see what comes, and some really great speakers. I wanted to start by asking a show of hands. So in this room, how many of us are actually working with UX or UX design? You can just raise your hand. I'd love to get a good grasp. Ooh, lots of UXers. How many of us are among the group are more engineering focused, more coding, and more thinking about things in that way? Okay, one little hand, more hands, awesome. Anybody here in the room a product manager? More business side, more thinking about the requirements? All right, this is all good to know. I want to kind of frame who I'm talking to. Want to ask for another show of hands. Have you ever been in a meeting and it goes on, and it goes on, and in the meeting, you start to check your phone, and you realize this meeting probably should have been an email. Has anyone ever been in a meeting like that? Yes. Haha, very funny. My job as a program manager is to make sure that doesn't happen, but I do that on a much grander scale. A little bit about me. I've been at Google for 5 years, and I'm currently on the Google Cloud Platform UX team. Our users are enterprise customers, so that's a lot of challenges that go along with that. But at Google on Cloud, I lead the PMO, and we have about 12 program managers. That's the program management organization. We focus as program managers on finding opportunities to improve team efficiency. So that could mean streamline all design operations, which means making sure your reviews are smooth and have a clear goal. It could mean your launches are smooth and a high quality of design bar, right? And it means unblocking teams so we can all ship either user improvements or new features that make money and generate revenue so we can all continue working at our jobs. So previous to Google, I worked at a lot of advertising agencies, so similar to a lot of you. I was building campaigns for clients like Paramount Pictures and American Idol. So today, what are we talking about? I want to share 3 things. I'm very tactical, action-oriented, maybe to a fault. So I want to share with you 3 program manager pro tips that will help you in your work, and you can bring it back to your desk on Monday. Getting teams to work well together is probably one of the biggest challenges we all face as leaders. But in my life, I've learned that designing the thing actually takes the least amount of time. But what takes the most time is negotiation. It's collaboration. It's getting everyone to agree. So I'll tell you a little bit about the main product team at Google. It's consisting of user experience design, engineering, and product management. So these 3 tips. I'm going to talk to you about how to have these 3 gold standard teams, UX design, product management, and engineering, work well together. So the first tip I'm going to leave you, pro tip, common goals. You have to really establish your common goals and share the vision with all of the different cross-functional groups. I'm going to talk to you how we find this through a pretty structured framework at Google called OKRs. And then you have to communicate. So what's that vision? What does that vision need to make it come to life? And what does your team need to understand that vision? As leaders, we have to build these kind of soft skills in communicating that no one really talks about, because it helps make your product vision and your leadership a reason for making the whole team successful, right? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about co-designing. And when I say co-designing, I'm actually talking about the working processes, the things that involve your entire team, and potentially, if you're an agency working with your client, or if you're a client working with an agency, same thing. You really have to optimize the collaboration with all of these disparate groups of people. But first, I want to tell a story. And I promise this story ends with actual methodology and my pro tips. But it's a story that's really personal. It's actually a story of how my parents met. So think back to a time in history. The year is 1975. The city is Saigon, Vietnam. And a 27-year-old woman is working as a paralegal in the American embassy. One day into April, well into April, she gets called into an urgent all-hands meeting. Everybody at the embassy had to show up. This meeting was being run by an American captain, and he stands up on a desk and he says, "We just got word North Vietnam is advancing on Saigon. South Vietnam is going to surrender. So we have 1 week to evacuate everyone who's working with the Americans, who studied in America, or anyone who's related to these people." And the American captain said, "Who's going to help me organize this?" So a hand was raised in the back of the room, and the crowd parted. And that hand actually belonged to my mom. So she helped volunteer, track down all these people, and help direct them out of the country. The American captain was my dad. That's basically how my parents met. And the president of South Vietnam resigned a few days later. This is what American history calls the fall of Saigon. And if you can't see that picture, it's a picture I stole off Google. And it's a picture of a helicopter with a lot of people climbing onto the helicopter. Obviously, they're not going to fit, right? But the helicopter was airlifting people off of the roof of buildings, and it was bringing all these people to the South China Sea, where there were these giant cargo ships waiting to ferry people to safety. So this was an urgent thing to do. This was an urgent program. I'm not being dramatic when I say this was life and death. If you worked with the USA, you would have been either executed or you would have been sent to work in re-education camps, camps where people slowly starved to death. So that week, it's estimated 12,000 people were taken out of the country via the American embassy. And overall, I'm a big history buff, overall about 200,000 were evacuated from the country. So if you're in the back of the room and you can't see this image, it's an image of a cargo ship that was waiting in the South China Sea. And I think it's really funny because you can tell that people actually brought umbrellas with them because they knew it was going to be super hot. It's like very interesting foresight. You have to be protected from the sun, protect your skin. It looks really hot out in Vietnam. And if you can't see this picture, it's another photo of 4 kids. They're holding their suitcases, and one is holding a girl that looks like about my daughter's age. It's super haunting when you think about it because I don't see their parents anywhere in the frame. And it really strikes me, right? So why am I sharing this story with you? To me, this is an example of collaborating in an urgent time of crisis. So evacuating people out of Vietnam was mission critical, right? The US military and the South Vietnamese military had to establish a common goal. They had very different cultural things and very big differences in how they worked, right? But their shared goal for this example was to evacuate everyone who was associated with the United States. So let's switch gears. Let's bring this back to what we do every day. How does my example kind of relate to what we do? I feel like this is an example of how it's all about defining your goals both as a functional team, design, product, management, or engineering, and then sharing that vision. So I feel like shared goals are they really have to be the foundation of everything you do, and it cascades throughout all the tactics, all the communication. So whether you're a designer, a product manager, or an engineer, it's gonna help you align your partners, and it's gonna help you agree to the end result. And that's kind of half the battle when you're doing all this stuff, right? Because if you don't agree at the onset, you're not gonna agree at the end. So if you can do this, you can focus on the same issues throughout all the functions and throughout the organization. I'm gonna take you through our little process called OKRs. It's what we do to create shared goals at Google. Has anybody worked with this before? Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool. So I'll tell you about the high level of this and why I think it's important. And also, does anyone know who invented this? Because it wasn't me. It was a guy named Andy Grove. I believe he worked at Intel. So to be very honest, I think that management lingo feels very inauthentic. I think that people don't really resonate with it, but I do feel like the framework of OKRs are a pretty good thing. It's really a method to help ensure all these different functions with different goals are focusing on the same issues as much as possible. So the O is your objective. It's what you want to accomplish. Make it aggressive, but you should make it realistic. Keep it very simple and write them as if you're writing it after the fact, like you're looking back. So an example that I like to use is product X successfully launched with 50 million 30-day active users. And then the KR. So the key result is how you're going to accomplish that O. The key result really can be very measurable and specific, and you should try to limit the key result toward the end outcome, but not all the immediate steps in between, because you know there's a lot of stuff in between, right? I think that a target completion date can be also helpful, so you're not thinking about things way, way off in the future. So as an example, you could say users generated $100 million in Q3 by using our new feature. So now this is your aspirational North Star. And if you can get your team to agree, and hopefully this is driven by real user research and actual user pain points, you can have that key result aligned to the vision, which is the O, and then distribute that communication throughout your whole team. And you distribute it by writing them with your team. You need to agree to that business value, otherwise you're always going off in these separate siloed directions. So if you're a manager, I really recommend working with your team to define and set these and shape them, and then checking in throughout the quarter. And it's also a really great way for the user experience team to start influencing product roadmaps. Because what I hear time and time again, designers are trying to get a seat at the table. They're trying to stop being in a service model. So that kind of way of working sucks. It's really going to help you get in front of all these requests if you approach your peers, your team, and say, why don't we think about our goals together? And then publish them. You have to really share your vision, talk about it, check in with your team, and stay accountable and say, how are we doing? How did we do? My second pro tip is communicate. I feel like poor communication and a real lack of trust is what I hear a lot. Or back to my original example, what if you're in a meeting and there's no agenda, there's no goal, everyone's kind of on their phones and you're not really sure why you're all sitting there. So in my original example, language, especially if you know any Vietnamese, language is a very difficult thing to grok for South Vietnamese and Americans. But what type of communication really goes beyond language? I feel like that answer is music. So a little historical fun fact, when the American radio service announced that the temperature in Saigon over the airwaves was 105 degrees and rising, this was in April, and then they played the Bing Crosby song, White Christmas, it was a flag to everyone that personnel knew they needed to immediately go to all of the points around the city, which were designated like assembly points. So I'm not saying play music and everyone's going to agree, but what I am saying is how do we learn from that example to get everybody on the same page? You can't always use music to communicate. So here are some methods that will teach you and teach your team to get what they need. The first thing is identify what blocks you. Blockers are really interesting, but I feel like you have to frame it as if you're not doing some blame game, but rather, what are you blocked by? How do you remove that blocker? And how do you move forward? Because I keep telling my team, activity does not equal output, right? You can talk about stuff for a long time, but you need to gather the requirements. You need to figure out what requirements address the scope and what doesn't, and what your open things are. Open questions, I should say. Next up, I really feel like we don't tell enough stories. Already some of the speakers today talked about how the features can't live in like a silo, right? So what is the entire story? How are you putting your user needs first? And how are you telling that story? And by grounding it in real user data that users actually need. Because the feature your team is working on, it actually ladders up to a much bigger picture, right? This is the biggest issue I see in teams that won't partner. It's trust and a lack of trust. I feel like engendering trust, it comes from doing and not showing and not telling. But if everyone's able to do their best work by removing blockers, by understanding what is really driving the work, it'll help everyone get there, and you'll get better buy-in from your stakeholders and your partners. And then last, I really see a lot of problems with people who won't give up control. I think this is hard, especially for small businesses or especially for clients who feel like their brand is super close to their heart. So how do you arm your team with more information so they can be a better partner? I have a tip for that. Let's talk about it. What do I mean when I say co-design? It's kind of a funny term, right? I think it means involving people who are not designers in the research, bringing them to research studies, involving them in the design part of the work. Designing the process to get from kickoff, or even pre-kickoff, all the way to launch is something that needs to be communicated and talked about with the team. What is our meeting cadence? How often do we meet? Why? And how does it all ladder up to our final OKR and goal? And really, I recommend crowdsourcing this because you might hear different opinions from different parts of the org or the team. And you might be surprised what's actually been working well and what's not working well and needs a tweak, or what's not working well and needs a full-fledged makeover. So bringing this back to my original example, the South Vietnamese government and the military had to put aside those cultural differences, right? They had to transcend what made them so different in order to work together. So how do you see past your team boundaries? So many designers in this room. But we need to create work that resonates with everybody, right? The user, the PM, and the eng. So first is research, right? I mentioned this before. Have your team, you guys are the designers, but have everyone else attend these user studies. It's always shocking to me how research is conducted and how hearing words directly from users can impact the work. My second thing under these steps is gather the pain points from the research and address them in the design. Make sure everybody knows what the pain points are, and invite these PMs and eng to design with you. Invite sales, invite legal, invite marketing, support. All these people need to know all the stuff that goes into the final result, because otherwise they're going to swoop and poop, and they're going to come in at the end and change everything. And I think that everyone has experienced the swoop and poop. I would also say plan to work on the most urgent priorities first. At Google, it's kind of like a constant struggle to prioritize, to stack rank, and to get that stack rank of priorities in front of people who will continue making the decisions. So it's an ongoing challenge. I feel like I'm never in planning mode because I'm always in planning mode. There's never really like a planning month. It's just always, as program managers, checking in. And then your users actually don't really care what you do. They don't care about your organizational boundaries. They don't care about the struggles that you might face. And I don't really feel like you should either. So before you begin this entire process, there's a prerequisite stage, which we have discussed: know your users. Everyone on your team, the designers, of course, the product managers, the engineers, sales, marketing, legal, they all really need to be customer obsessed. I feel like we need to have empathy for our users because that way we'll understand their needs, we'll understand their preferences, and we'll get out of our headspace. But you need to have empathy with your teammates, right? These other functions that can be kind of difficult in order to get anything done. So let's go through my 3 pro PGM tips again. Common goals, communicate those goals, and co-design the entire working process with your team. And I'm going to sneak in a final tip. It is know your user. And that's it today. Thank you all.